Delaware and a few other East Coast states that I work with quite a bit. So every year I work with more than 100 companies that are moving in one direction or the other across the Atlantic, of all shapes and sizes, with all sorts of problems that need solved and created. And really my time is spent firefighting with those guys who are trying to do their thing.
Hi, I'm Simon Cole. Complicated. I just took a new job yesterday, so I don't really know who I am right now. But I think I'm the CEO of Bay Analytical, which is a spin out from Queens. For the last 13 years, I've been CEO of Automated Intelligence. And over the last 25 years, I've been working in the software industry. Lived in the US for a few years and helped take Meridio back in the day out there and set up the office there. So a little bit of experience there. And then probably for the last 6 or 7 years in Automated Intelligence, we were trying to figure out how to get into the US again. So we can talk about some of those scars more than anything.
Lovely. Can't wait for that. Thank you both very much for coming along today. And then online, across that Atlantic, is Paul first. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Paul, from Ludus.
Yes, hello everybody. Hey Declan, how you doing? So happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I'm in charge of putting the turkey in the oven, and I have managed to do that. So if I run out, it means that there's smoke coming out of it. So I'm the managing director of Litus. Litus is a soft landing platform that we set up here specifically to provide a one-stop shop for companies looking to enter the US. We specifically work with the SMEs. We recognize they're spending their own money. And what we've done is we've created an umbrella group with professionals that handle each and every task that you would need from entering the marketplace, both from formation to banking to immigration to insurance to human resources, site location. And obviously I'm from Dublin originally, so I've been over here 42 years or more. And so that's what our specialty is, and we work with a bunch of companies from Ireland, England, Northern Ireland, and the like, and help them come in.
Great stuff. Thank you, Paul. I love that after 42 years, that Dublin accent is still hanging in there.
Well, that's because I work with mostly Irish people, so that's the deal.
We do all gravitate towards each other, don't we? And Jolie as well. Whereabouts are you based? Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, everyone, happy Thanksgiving. I'm actually now back in Kansas City. I'm a dual citizen, American Canadian. And my background, I ended up in Canada to actually expand a US company into the Canadian market, and have always sold on both sides of the border for companies like PayPal, Adobe, ServiceNow, and others, and decided to pick up my bag. I've also worked with a lot of founders and startups, 50 pro bono when I was at PayPal, helping them any way I could on both sides of the border, Techstars, Tech Undivided, and really working with VCs. So yeah, I moved back to Kansas City. Can't believe what's going on here. Big Irish Scot population, by the way, and one of the coolest St. Paddy's Day parades if you're ever in Kansas City for St. Paddy's Day at O'Malley's Pub. And yeah, so any way I can help, during this or even post, sales is my thing. Love it. And helping with go-to-market strategy. Happy to help you out.
Lovely. Thank you very much. We have a nice kind of breadth of experience with our speakers, but just wanted to mention, like, this session is about you guys. So I think that's fundamental. And we always approach our workshops with this idea that we want you to get as much value out of it as possible. So please raise your hand, ask any questions, and by all means, we do have a couple of pointers to get through, but would like to shape it according to your needs. Okay, so interested in hearing all of these stories, but firstly, Simon, I want to pick up on your the previous company's experience that you attempted to get into the States, certainly with Automated Intelligence. There was intentions. So tell me a wee bit about that, kind of why the US was the next step and how that went.
Yeah, I think for us, so our play was a big data play, and it was helping large enterprises take control of their data. And ultimately in that, it was messy data we were finding. And the reality was that it worked best when there was too much data. And obviously then you hit the US and all of a sudden the data volumes go tenfold. So we would have worked with the likes of WPP over in New York. And they would have had, 33 petabytes of data, which for us was I can't even equate that in terms of number of files, but it was significant volumes of data that we had to get through. And it was that appetite realization, because we kind of conquered, I guess, the UK government market, and we were working in a lot of other institutions, but we knew there were just, you know, multiplication of the data sets in the US. So that was our desire to get over there. And I mean, it worked for us in that a lot of the organizations we dealt with in the UK, they naturally took us into the US. So we had US customers, and what we were playing with, I guess, was actually establishing a presence in the US. And do we do that? Do we not do that? And funding for us was always one of the challenges, because my previous life where we did enter the US, you know, we took a 10 million investment to do that, and we spent it really, really quickly and didn't have a lot to show at the end of a couple of years having spent 10 million. Now, look at that company ultimately exited. It was a success. But I just know you could spend a lot of money if you don't do it right. And we spent a couple of years literally chasing our tails, you know, accepting every meeting invite, which meant we just, Monday to Saturday, we just flew back and forth across the States. And, you know, could have had more success, I think, had we done it with focus rather than the scattergun quick. Somebody likes an Irish accent, get on a plane and go and sit in front of them and hope that that's how you'll get a sale, and it doesn't work like that. Yeah, it has to be, and I guess we'll maybe get into it, but you know, in terms of the go-to-market, how, you know, it's really important to have a really solid go-to-market in terms of the US and how you approach the market, and what you're trying to sell.
And if you don't mind me asking, did that 10 million of investment come from the States, or was that local here with the intention to?
Yeah, that was local money that was put in with a view to you know, expanding that US market, and it did happen, right? We had some, and we looked after all of the White House emails back at the time when the private email servers, yeah, it was pretty. We couldn't obviously see any of that information, but we were very successful in doing that. But the expenditure far exceeded the income in that sense. So high profile, but so yeah, it was all local money that went in to try and make that happen.
Okay. And Declan, do you find that most startups that you see or businesses that you would support in London in the States have had a big injection of cash to allow them to do so?
Yes and no. I think there's two different ways to do it. The option down the middle doesn't work, in my view, from what I've seen. People who try to tiptoe in, spend a bit of money, and that scattergun approach that you've spoken about, tend to run into trouble very secretly, or very quickly. I tend to think it's either a push or a pull movement into the US. So you've gone and you've maybe acquired your first customer, and then you go and you do an amazing job with that first customer, try and find a second and third, and then try to build a small presence around that and slowly expand your footprint in the US. And then that's when you need to avail of the services of professional people around you to build your structure there. Or else, if you have oodles of cash, then you can go and be more aggressive in terms of spending a lot of money. However, what I will say in terms of that, you have to have very deep pockets if you want to go in at scale, and it's not for the faint of heart. So it has to be surgical either way. But there's definitely two extremes that tend to be successful. Either you can drop 10 to 20 million pounds and get significant national coverage, or else you can just keep to your knitting, as my father would say, and do the small bit right at the start, get that repeat business, that second, third contract, and scale from there. Most of the companies I work with are in the SME phase. So it's almost always coaching them to do an amazing job with their first customer, or helping them to access that first purchase order. Once you've got that, then you can build. But you can't do it unless you've got significant resources. You can't push into the US. You have to be pulled in.
Okay, thank you. Paul, would that be a similar experience to what you've seen? Is that you kind of go small, get one customer, do that job well, and build that smaller customer base, perhaps in one location, or else you have that big injection of capital and you're able to grow quite quickly at scale? Or what are your experiences?
So the experiences, hopefully I've got this. Is the share working now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I think the first thing that we say to people is understand the scale of the United States as to where you are, as to where you're coming from. You're basically dealing with 51 countries. You're dealing with the federal government and then the 50 states. And just the size of the US, this is another map. Eva has a copy of all this in a PDF that we can share with people. But these are the countries of some countries in the world allocated to states based on GDPs. So if you understand that the state I'm in today, Pennsylvania, is the 18th biggest economy in the world GDP-wise. The United Kingdom is the same scale as California. Canada is the same scale as Texas. Pennsylvania is the same size as Saudi Arabia. And as a wit from Mayo told me, that's why we like the live golf, apparently. But you just have to understand the scale. And even if you have 10 million or you have 20 million, you're not really going to be able to take on the US. So to Declan's point, what our view is, get yourself a customer, service that customer to the maximum extent, and then grow the business from there. You can also, you don't need to rush into opening an office. You can incubate for a year to 18 months. You can actually expand in the US from Belfast by just repetitive visits and the right visas, just by giving the impression that you're there. It's all about service. People don't necessarily look to where your bricks and mortar are. So we're much more for the SMEs, get the first customer, service it well, get your team together. We'll touch on human resources later, and then that would be our approach.
Okay, that's interesting, and there's loads actually I want to unpack in that. But I'm going to ask Jolie about that location. So how, in your experience, if you find, like, how do startups determine that best location or that state that fits, the product or the service that they're offering in their go-to-market strategy?
Listen, I take a different approach as a 23-year-old who packed a U-Haul and went to a country where I knew nothing. I would say find some coaches. So first it starts with, what are you doing? Who are you doing it for? Identify stakeholders, as many as you can, because multi-department stakeholders are really key, right? The more departments I can touch with an ROI, and those can be by proxy, identify that. What's your differentiation and what's your value expectation? Find coaches. And I'll give you an example. I'm a 22-year-old that goes to Canada. I know crap about Canada. But I called the president of Allstate at home on a Saturday morning. His name was Bob Curry. And Bob built our entire plan for strategy for free for me for Canada. And we were going to go in at a rate, and I'll give you an example. And Bob said, no way. You can get 45% more because your competitors have colluded. Go in at X. And now if I've coached you, what do I have to do? I have to become your client. I'm your coach. So and then finally, the second advice I give is the coasts are very incestuous. Everybody wants to go to California. Everybody wants to go to New York. They're deeply incestuous. Why would I go to a watering hole with 1,000 wildebeests? There are delightful. Missouri's one of them. I just met with a bunch of Casey Development Council. Go where the Irish Scots are. You've got about, I want to say 30 cities. Those are like New Orleans. Pennsylvania has a high Irish Scot, Kansas City. Identify your coaches. Be very clear about what you're doing and the stakeholders and your value add and your differentiation. Bring them into your arena. Don't worry about industry too, right? I can go on to Sales Navigator right now. I can pull every individual in the US who has an Irish connection back to a headquarter. So there's a lot of, but I always when I coach mentors, and I'll give you an example and then I'll let everybody else talk. I had a gal that I was working with, and she had hired a $40,000 consultant who told her to go to California and New York. Again, they will buy their own technologies, right? Because of VC deep. And I told her, go to the Midwest. And she got a $20 million contract out of Iowa.
Yep.
In 2 weeks, because they were dying for her STEM technology. So that's just a little bit. I would say, go to where the others don't go. Your stakeholders should be offensive players, not defensive players, right? And yeah, reach out, just bring them in as your coaches, have them help you map the strategy. The US is like 50 different countries. There's a real beauty in that, right? So, and they're risk takers. So I'll leave it at there, but that's kind of my approach. Get coaches first, the customers will come.
That's wonderful. That's great, Julie. Thank you. You touched a wee bit on those Irish connections, or people who have Irish connections over in the States. Anyone I speak to seems to come back to, I knew a fella and he heard my accent and he loved my accent, and that was the in that they got. Which is class, because we're all very lucky now.
I was going to say that everybody loves the Irish. And so, if you're reaching out to these coaches, by the way, link into them on LinkedIn. And then once their first connection, you can leave them a voicemail through LinkedIn on your mobile app. or create, I'm not kidding, or create a Loom video or Vidyard and send the 2-minute link. Don't send text. Take advantage of the fact that people love the Irish. Like, honest to God, right? It wasn't that way when I went to Canada. Nobody liked the Americans in Canada. So I had to take a bit of a different approach. Right? But I'm serious on that. Take advantage of those little things, and they go a long way. And then, again, what you're going to get regionally as well is, like Midwesterners will love to help you. I just had coffee with the KC Development Council. I had no idea their biggest partners were Germany and Japan. So there's a lot going on. Find the watering holes where all the wildebeests are not going. That's your target market.
So
for Cindy there that popped in saying she's South African, accents will open a lot of doors, and you've more wildebeest. You've more wildebeest in South Africa than we do in Ireland, so you're all right there.
That's true.
The fact of being foreign will open a lot of doors here. It will not close the sale, but it will open a lot of doors. But you also have to realize, and just as Cindy's case, an American has no idea that South Africa won the World Cup. So if you start coming in and saying, "Did you watch the World Cup final?" they're going to look at you like you've two heads. But it will open a lot of doors. I 100% agree with working with the States and the contacts. But it won't close the sale. Your performance will close the sale, but your accent will open a lot of doors.
Yeah, and again, just targeting the people that no one else is targeting. Find those really good stakeholders and asking people for help. People are generous with their time. That president came in when we had folding tables and built our entire business plan for these 20-somethings. When we were negotiating leases, I had no idea about covenants and build out. And when I just said, "Hey, can you help me?" to the toughest landlords in Toronto, I look back now and those leases were insane that they built for us, right? So when you ask people for help instead of selling them, they will rise to the occasion, because everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, even if they're heading up procurement.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And sorry, Cindy, for blanketing us all as Irish. And I realise now we have a lot of diversity in the room. So we're not all Irish.
Adopted Irish.
Pardon?
Adopted.
You're definitely adopted Irish. But yes, no, that's brilliant. And I think that leads us nicely on to that power of networking, which both is so applicable in certainly here, because Northern Ireland is so small. But certainly over there, it's about strategically identifying those connections that can be helpful for you. And guys, I'd love you to share a wee bit about kind of that approach of finding the right people. Maybe it's establishing a partnership with them, or having that kind of advocacy almost for your brand. Is that something you would see quite often, Declan?
Yeah, I'm always like most things. Two things can be true at the same time. I'm a massive advocate for network building, and in particular for collaboration. So if you're looking to close that first major contract, the biggest challenge that Irish companies in particular, or any company coming to the US, is, are you better than who's already there? Like, why on earth would they buy from you when they could buy from a guy down the street? And it's the same here. When you're making your own selections, if there's a local supplier, you will naturally go towards that versus a supplier coming from a different part of the globe. But the reality is, if you can find the correct partners, then you can go into the supply chain through those guys, you can co-bid, and then all of a sudden you've got a few case studies of your own, and you've got a little bit more to work with. The one thing I would say on the diaspora side, in terms of the Irish connection, is it's also really important whenever you're playing that game to be absolutely ruthless in terms of understanding where there is value and where there is not value. I have been part of so many conversations with somebody that have been mutually introduced, and about half an hour into the conversation, neither of us have any idea why we're there. There is no value to be had from the conversation. And we're going to be polite and never speak to each other again unless something very specific comes up. So I would just say it's about being somewhat ruthless from that network development piece, about being very respectful and kind and being grateful for people for their time, using the network as was pointed out to open the door, to get that chink of light and have the conversation that you might not necessarily have had the opportunity to do so before. But then being very honest with the other person and yourself, if maybe you can introduce them to someone else who's going to help them, but it's not you. Because I know so many people who fly to the US to join the thousands of Irish Chamber of whatever city event, and there's no business for them. There's no opportunity for them. Whereas if they took that time and put it into something sector specific, or did a deep dive into a particular city, and I absolutely agree, by the way, on the point about looking for other destinations. Most of the work that I do with people is trying to encourage them not to go to the place that their cousins went to, or that they have an uncle who lives there, or they saw on TV. The Midwest, what I would call very respectfully tier 2 locations, where you've got blue ocean and not as much competition, you can get fabulous contracts. I know one company who went to Delaware, who make shampoos, products for pets, and it was a very small company from Cumbria, and they were doing 200 grand a year in Cumbria. They do $10 million a year from Delaware now, because of the scale of the market. And it's a mom and pop operation with 3 folks who work in the factory, but the scale of output they get from that marketplace just blew it up. And again, that's not someone going to a major metropolis. This is rural Delaware. No one's getting excited about rural Delaware, but they've built a $10 million company there. So that looking at different locations and being really surgical with your networking is vital. You cannot be wasting your own or anyone else's time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Simon, what was that experience like? Did you have any partnerships in that kind of strategy getting into the States?
Yeah, and it's really fascinating, because we would have originally done what everybody does, which is New York. We know somebody, who lives in New York. Let's go to New York, and did the same in Boston. And I think you got to be careful. In terms of those coaches, you really need to understand the power of those coaches, but find good coaches, because there's plenty of people who will say, we'll bring you in. We did one trip, we were loaded up with our Bushmills whiskey bottles, and everybody got one to all the meetings, but we got 0 from it, because they were people who were happy to take a meeting because, somebody said there's an Irish company coming over, would you like to meet them? They're like, sure, we'll meet them. But there was no business value behind it, and there was no opportunity, and everybody's very polite, so everybody will say, yes, great, fantastic, let's catch up on this next week, and then there's nothing. So you really need to make sure that your coach, is on the money, understands the market, and understands where you're going to benefit, where the customers are that are going to benefit. Boston, I would say, is probably overpopulated. It's one of those places where everybody lands, because it seems to be easy. And we did some of the MIT programs out there, which are phenomenal. So it's a great place to get educated, but it's not necessarily a great place to try and do business in a sense. Where it worked best for us was where we would have taken existing partners in the UK and in Ireland, and used those partners to find new people in the US. So people that, we were tried and trusted, and we could get that introduction. So we would have been very close and working heavily with Microsoft. So it was really easy for us to get the doors open, the right people in the industry who knew where the bodies were buried, to take us there in the US. So that was a really probably the most success we would have had in terms of direct market engagement, would have been through that partner network. And yeah, so it's definitely the network's there. There is some fantastic diaspora who will open doors. We got some fantastic opportunities through working with like some of the guys in First Derivatives who were in the FS market, understood it, and they could properly coach us into those, and some really good connections through the likes of EY and people. And again, but a really critical thing I think is, you know, your approach to market. I think everybody comes with a view, right? We're going to the US. What are we going to tell them? And you try and build up something different and something wow that you do that's new and exciting. You're really good at what you already do. So don't try and do something special for the US. Just take what you're good at, what you've proven, and repeat it. If what you do can't be repeated in the US, trying to do something new in the US isn't going to work. You're just going to waste a lot of cycles proving that you don't know what you're talking about. And I know, again, speaking from experience, we would have gone, right, we need a new set of slides with some new fantastic wording in it that's really going to get the American market. And really, they just wanted to know, were we successful where we were and how they would do it. The other point is about presence. You have to be there. You have to be seen to be there. There's no point saying I'll be over in 3 months' time when I'm doing my next, you know, trip. You need to be, if the customer, if you want to sell to somebody in America, they need to feel that you are American in the sense that, you know, all of America has different accents. So it doesn't matter how you speak in one sense, but you need to appear like you are serious and you're in the country for business whenever you need to be.
You mentioned really interestingly there about changing or flexing what your proposition is, which I think is definitely an interesting point of discussion, you know, around those like cultural nuances really. So you have something that's definitely sellable here. How much, if at all, is, now I know the great successful product can be set into another market, great successful product, but is there differences in terms of, you know, Joni, you mentioned that culturally people are very helpful, they're very open, like they all kind of aspire to have that kind of entrepreneurial flair within them. Do you have to, I suppose, change and adapt your offering in any sense to make it appropriate for those different cultures, considering that, as we've said, America is like 52 different countries in one. So if anyone would be interested in speaking to that, to hear your thoughts.
A couple of quick things. First of all, you got to, you know, depending what you're doing, we were looking after data, and data protection varies 52 different ways in the US. So you got to be aware that it's not just like the EU that has GDPR. So there's multiple legal loopholes that you need to get through. And it goes without saying that your product, if it's a SaaS or a technology product, needs to be pretty scalable, because everything you're going to do is 10, 100 times bigger than what you've probably done in the UK.
Okay, very good. Any thoughts, Declan?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. The other thing that's interesting is, in particular, whenever I work with, say, medical device companies or health-based companies, the cultural difference in terms of doing anything into the wellness health industry in the US is incredible. In terms of there are products here that people fight and have to educate health services here that their product is useful and should be included on the NHS, and they have to jump through all the things because the thing here is cost-based, so everything has to be useful and at the right cost. In the US, all medical products are revenue generating. So any piece of, and with all due respect, tat that a doctor can use to test something or can be used in dental practices or whatever that you might not necessarily need, but they can charge $30 for using. Your product is not a cost to them, it's now a revenue generator. So there are lots of industries in the US which are operated in a completely culturally different way than they are here. Health is the biggest example, but food and drink is very, very different as well. And even from the tech side, again, back to the 50 countries piece, if you're in the East Coast in one of the big cities, doing a SaaS play or something like that is kind of largely understood is culturally there, and everyone's trying to build those propositions together. You head into the Midwest or you head down south, you're still trying to sell these technologies. The adoption isn't, there's some very advanced companies, but on a scale basis, you don't have the same scale. So you have to approach the business differently. You have to approach the sale differently. And again, the relationships become really important and finding those early advocates. So it is the cultural piece is just massively significant. And the application of a product, and I'm working with a company here at the moment who have a piece of technology which has a very clear use in the UK. But when I look at the US market, I'm going, it's exactly the same thing, but we need to communicate it in an entirely different way, because the stakeholders on that side of the Atlantic think differently and have another agenda than what they do So the communication has to completely change. So it's really important.
Yeah, just on the communication side of things, to follow up on a point Declan made earlier, you need to be strategic in your engagement, for example, with trade missions and the like. So we break trade missions down here. A lot of them are what we call civics, which are governmental really in purpose. They come over really for the pictures with the mayors and the announcement of some policy. They're absolutely worthless to businesses. So without putting too fine a point on it. And so you must be strategic. You can use the chambers, you can use the business associations to get access to businesses, but that's what you need. You need to connect with businesses, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. We do some work in the UK, and there was actually a guy from Canada that happened at a dinner with us in July, and he said, I've been meeting with chambers of commerce around the UK, but I'm very disappointed at the business leads they're giving me. He says, what do they sell? And I said, they sell memberships. And once they get your membership, then they've achieved their goal. So it's good to be part of these missions. They often get put together, but they don't meet with businesses. They're more political in nature than they are business specific. For example, one of the things we do is we do a trade mission to Pennsylvania here at the last week of February and the first couple of days of March to capture some of the St. Patrick's Day stuff, but to specifically stay away from the St. Patrick's Day week, which is an absolute, you're not going to do any business that week. That's really just a picture event. Another idea that has occurred and is in practice here, we've had a series of Irish construction companies that are in different aspects of the construction field, SaaS product itself, project management. They've combined as a group because they're complementary and they're not competing with each other. And they share the cost, for example, of trade shows, which is a very effective way to do a trade show. Instead of spending, I don't know, 20,000 on a trade show, you're paying a seventh of that for the stand and everything. So it goes back to guerrilla marketing. It goes back to you're spending your own dollars and getting the best bang for your buck. And never in the United States be afraid to reach out to somebody with a question. Because I think, as Declan and Simon and Josie will say, if an American can't give you the answer, there's a good chance they're going to refer you to somebody. Because it's so vast here, 365 million people. Money's not the same object it is at home. And they're not naive, but they are very helpful.
Great. Thank you.
I would just add to that, as somebody, guys, who's been in sales for 30 years. I've sold to Europe, Central America, US, Canada, you name it, right, for various companies. There are cultural differences, but human beings, we're all kind of alike, right? In that, you are selling to a person. If somebody tells you they're buying for their company, they're buying personally. It's psychologically, right? So it comes down to best practices or best practices anywhere. It's really knowing who you are and who they are and identifying those who play offense within companies or defense, depending on what you're selling. I will tell you, it's been a very tough year for everybody in sales in the last year. And that's because when you have conflict after conflict globally, right, that tends to weigh on people psychologically. And when people are weighed on psychologically, they start to all play defense. And so, I definitely agree there's cultural differences, but sales best practices will always reign supreme. And if you lead with curiosity and you lead with that customer and you find the holes in their armor and what they need to solve for, right, you're going to close that sale and you're going to turn those prospective customers into your coaches. When I talk about coaches, I'm talking about turning your buyers into your coaches so that they can help you sell to them. And that's a really effective strategy. But I think if you lead with curiosity and you have a lot of fun and you know who you are and you can clearly identify who you are and what they need, that underpins all of good selling, right? So I would say have a lot of fun. Don't take it so serious. I get the healthcare market. My buddies are VPs at healthcare companies. They're a pretty serious group. But also the final thing I would say is substance over sexy, right? Everybody wants to sell to sexy. But what I found is some of the sexiest companies are the most boring companies that no one wants to talk to. You know, I was talking to a 50,000 employee elevator company, and their technology blows away most SaaS companies. I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I would tell you to this day, it is still the most intelligent company I've ever worked for. Our command center was bigger than NASA's. We could see real-time data in 1999, and we had a Latino strategy in 2000, right? So really go after the non-sexy companies because they're going to be a lot more sophisticated than you think, right? So I'll kind of leave that there.
Great. I'm sure that's provoked lots of thoughts for people. I would like to go to questions for the audience and then with another couple of things to get through, but I'm conscious of time. Jackie has asked a question and she's been very patiently waiting there. So Jackie's asked, any advice on connecting with the media in the US? So it's kind of back to our stakeholders and getting your messaging out there and those connections. Any thoughts? Declan, what would you kind of typically advise people?
Yeah, one wider point actually, and that opens the door to it nicely, is about engaging early with local authorities in the region. I know that it's kind of fashionable to poo-poo government agencies and economic development agencies and things like that because people have their own issue with agencies here. However, generally speaking, these organizations are fully staffed with, and the lady has mentioned Kansas City. Kansas City Development is one of the most proactive agencies in the US. They're a phenomenal organization I've had the pleasure of working with a few times. They can handle the media on your behalf. They can refer to local stakeholders on your behalf. They can refer to venture capital. They can help with recruitment. They can help with finding properties. And they can introduce you to people within the community. And while I'm not saying that's something that you should depend on, because at the end of the day, they don't primarily get paid to do that. So you can't totally depend on them. They're phenomenally well connected. So it's better, like most things, to engage early in the market, well before you have the problem, to engage with these folks and to do that. So there are lots of local people that will help you, but it comes back to the thing about building your network. If you can find one or two well-connected mentors and well-connected influencers within that local market, they'll know all the people that you need to speak to, and they can probably save you a significant amount of time and money in trying to find them, especially if you're working remotely. So if you're in that stage where you're farming the market from here, you know, those local stakeholders will really help.
Okay. And hold that. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, when you talk about attracting the media, you have to be talking regionally. You can't possibly think about going nationally in the US. But again, you're dealing with, Pennsylvania, 18th biggest economy in the world. If you get publicity in Pittsburgh, that won't be repeated in Philadelphia. You know, there's no London Times for the United States. They're all Belfast Telegraphs, you know, focused on different regions. But on the economic development side, as Declan says, incredible support group for contacts, and very well worthwhile dealing with. One point, and I know you'll be well used to that in Belfast, there is very little direct governmental aid here, as opposed to what you might see in the Republic of Ireland there with Enterprise Ireland and the like, and the grants that are available. There are no specific grants as such. If you're going to bring 1,000 jobs to an area, they'll certainly give you some breaks on property taxes and real estate, but it's just something to be aware of, that it just doesn't exist as readily as it might in Europe and in the EU at the time.
Thank you. Okay. I want to come back to just that point, Declan, that you made about setting up from here and kind of harvesting and creating those leads and that interest in the startup or the business before actually committing to any kind of establishment. But if someone had, you know, those green shoots, a bit of traction, secured first customer, did a good job, how would one go about then setting up, let's say it's Pennsylvania, how would they go about setting up and starting to hire and build that team?
I think it's about finding your first key hire. I mean, that seems to be the issue that most people have. One of the things that's really interesting about the US is they don't really have a recruitment industry the same way as we do here. I mean, you can't walk down the street without tripping over 3 different recruitment companies in Belfast at the minute. I know of Irish companies that are moving to North America because there is no recruitment industry. It's very, very rare. So it's about, again, this comes back to the network development piece and knowing people in your industry who like your product, who have maybe experienced your service and are at a stage in their career where they can take a step to the side to help you grow the business in return for whatever it is that you're prepared to offer them. But it really is that first hire, and that you have 2 choices: either find someone that you would trust implicitly, that is your bedrock employee that will grow your business there, or else, frankly, and where most people end up is you got to get on a plane and relocate your family and invest in it properly. But that's on the SME track, and in bigger businesses, they will parachute in someone, or they'll be able to get someone from a competitor. But in the SME market, you've got to make a decision. If you're going to go for it, you've got to go for it, or else find that guy. And we do.
Or that girl.
Or that girl. That person. So
the founders of C-Sense have just relocated to Australia, and that's a business decision to go and live out there for a period of time to build that business. And they've got the UK running, so they can step out and go over there. There is a big thing, and that's why when we set up radio out there, we went over. There was, I think, 3 of us went out full time, living, half an hour outside Washington DC. We've got the IRS as our first customer. And then we were living, we were up and down the mall in Washington, going and seeing all the other government departments and just working that. So, and being there on the ground was the only way to really make that happen. That gave us the opportunity then to assess local staff and then build a team. And competitors are a fantastic way to get people in the US because everybody wants to work for an Irish firm, right? So you're this new startup Irish firm, and that's quite exciting for people. I came home with a son as a result of 2 years in the US. So that was what
Did you bring the wife home as well, Simon? Or
my wife and I both went over to America. Just to be clear.
Into context, folks.
Just to build on that, it's interesting to see because in a previous life I did all the inward investment for Northern Ireland from London, and the biggest issue in companies setting up here was the person that had to be parachuted in to set up the operation in here, and the reality was that most of those deals were sealed by showing them that they could live in a nice house in Stranmillis, be 5 minutes drive from the city centre, and get it all for under £300,000 at the time. I don't think you can anymore. But that lifestyle piece in them, even for those established businesses that are doing FDI deals, it all comes down to putting someone on the plane and parachuting them in to run and grow the business. So the market will always expect to see that sort of commitment from you, but you don't need to do it until you've got paying customers. So you can't do that at cost. Like that's suicide. You've got to have some customers and then drop in.
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah, just if I could just add on this, this is one of the most key mistakes that people make. If you think about it, so Ireland is a small island. Everybody basically knows everybody. We're probably all related. But because of the size of the island, you just look at Belfast, everybody knows everybody. Dublin, everybody knows everybody. So when you hire somebody, they'll work a little bit harder because the social aspect of it is, I don't want Declan to be upset with me because he's going to tell Simon's my cousin, and I don't want that to happen. You also have work contracts. US, you can just take that off the table. 365 million people, you're a job. Please, I would always tell people, don't hire somebody who's unemployed, because what you've done is, as an initial hire, is you've given them a platform to look for another job. So there is no, and the other thing about the US is the employment contracts are not the norm. So most of the states are what they call at will. So you can come in and say, I asked you not to wear that red tie. You've worn it 3 times. We're done. And that's it. So people think that's great, but it's not always that great. the first hire is so key. If you think about it, you are entrusting the growth of your company to somebody that you've known for 4 to 6 weeks. And if you think about it that way, it sounds a little bit crazy. So we really advocate the parachuting in. We really advocate a key member moving over. You go through the immigration process, because you cannot teach your culture from 3,500 miles away. You have to teach it in-house. And you find, probably Simon, you found people that you could work with in the States that you then left there, but you brought your culture over and taught that to them. So we really believe the parachuting in is the approach to take.
Thank you very much. Cindy, you'd put in a question there, or 2 questions, if you'd like to come on and ask them.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, we
Yep.
can. Yeah, we can.
Great. Okay. So I think this advice is very, very good. Thank you very much. There's some things that I haven't thought about, so that will definitely be a consideration for me. But once you've ticked all those boxes, you've landed the first client, you've landed your first employee, and you're starting to think about, okay, so how do I then grow this? One of the key next questions that is on everybody else's minds and lips is, okay, so you need to incorporate so that you can really grow. That's sort of one of the key next things that everybody think about. Now, leaving aside some of the complexities that a startup in the UK needs to go through in thinking about, well, if I'm going to be incorporating the US, I need to think about my SEIS and EIS investors, so I'm not discounting them or disadvantaging them. On top of that, the default location is, well, Delaware. I'd love to hear the opinion on that, because I have looked at this a little bit. You know, I'll add another question in as well. Is Stripe has got this process where Stripe is an organization. I can't remember, what was it called again? Stripe something, where they literally help you set up a
Yeah.
Say again, Paul? Sorry?
Yes, Stripe offers a service for their corporate. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they can incorporate you. That makes it all look really simple and easy, but me with my compliance hat on, and that's sort of the industry I come from, as well as a project manager, looks at that going, and it definitely can't be that easy. There must be a lot of things that you need to think about.
So let me just run through this. That's what we set up Litis because
Hey, Paul, you're echoing pretty hard.
I don't know why that's happening.
Sorry, I've just pinned Cindy, so sorry. Let me just, yeah, Cindy's muted and that should be okay now. Much better, I think.
Oh, that good? This is why we set Litis up, for an effect. You're spending your own money. So the deal with Delaware is Delaware has done an unbelievable marketing job of just selling itself as the state to incorporate it. And so you incorporate in Delaware, that's fine. It'll cost you, with our guide, $3,000. It'll cost you $225 a year. You use an attorney in our case, and he gives you corporate documents and everything else. Stripe, you do it for $750. They don't give you any corporate documents. They give you standard stuff. And one of the silly things is the application with the tax identification number. If your year end is March in the UK, you want it to be March in the US. If you form in September, the likelihood of Stripe will just get you an EIN that ends in September, so you have 2 different year ends. So that's, without selling Litis, that's what we do, is we're a one-stop shop to go through the whole process. You can do it yourself. When you see the presentation from Eva, if you ask for a copy of that, at the end, in the south of Ireland, we call them Woodies. In the UK, we call them B&Qers. These are our do-it-yourselfers. And there's a sign of a guy with his hair because the explosion blew up. Google is not your best friend, but it's a friend. But always ask the question. If you want to do it yourself, that's fine. Reach out to any of us and just ask the question. And but you've hit that. We've seen guys go down the Stripe way with the wrong year ends and everything else. So it's now you can then go to the top of the line. if you will, and you'll go to the development agencies and they'll send you to KPMG and Ernst & Young and the top law firms, and you'll spend a fortune in corporations. So
Yeah, and I would just weigh in there too. Like you can get, there's companies like Deal, guys. I don't know if everybody's heard of Deal, DEEL. You get freemium models up to 200 employees for things like HRIS and payroll. I know folks who are using it. They can get you a US visa. Like there's all kinds of stuff out there now. I mean, they're 12 billion valuation in 3 or 4 years. So they're a good startup story. But again, I always look for tools under freemium that I can potentially use for everything from payroll and tax structure if you are paying employees or where you want those visas for eventually settling yourself into other countries.
So I think the only question that's left then, so thank you for that, those responses. I think the only question is like, when do you start thinking about it?
It really depends. It really depends on your motivation at this point as to what you're trying to do. The interesting thing with Delaware, just to go back to that as a second, because I think, full disclosure, I have a small Delaware representation thing. So, but the reason why people incorporate for Delaware is if you're going to get sued anywhere in the US, that's the place you want to get sued. The Delaware court system is extremely friendly to corporate entities. They move very quickly, and they have a different type of judicial circuit than other states, meaning that they can kind of create legislation on the fly if laws that they encounter are silly. So Delaware lawyers, I'm being very, very simplifying this, and people much smarter than me can tell you it properly, but Delaware lawyers are generally more expensive as well because they specialize in Delaware law, and people from outside the state can't really practice inside Delaware. So if you have a business which has a high exposure to data risk, to corporate liability, to anything that could involve you getting sued, Delaware is a good place to be. If that's not a big issue for you, there are other states that charge much less tax. There are other states with better conditions in general. But Delaware exists for a very specific purpose. But most of their revenue as a state comes from brass plate corporations who pay their tax in Delaware but don't actually employ anybody. So that's why it exists the way it exists. But in terms of what you've asked, it really is down to the fact, are you at that place where you need even litigation, the litigation shield from having a US corporation? Are you employing people? Do you have to pay suppliers? Is that something that you want to expose your UK entity to from a risk profile point of view? These are all things, and it becomes a weight, and it's just a scale that whenever it reaches the tipping point, then you would incorporate. But it's not entirely different than what you already experience here whenever you have to make decisions around moving from a sole trader to a limited company to VAT registration or whatever. These are decisions that you make along your journey. So it's there, but Paul's absolutely right. You find the right representation, do it with an advisor or a lawyer, and get it right first time. Because the one thing that is true of the US, and in particular, if it's a Delaware firm, for companies who have venture capital and have a cap table, trying to make changes to a cap table in Delaware is an extremely expensive and difficult exercise. So get it right first time. That's all I'd say on it.
And if I could just add one thing to what Declan's saying, on the positive side for Delaware, other than the protection from the litigation, which is true, if you're going to raise funds in the US, invariably the VC or the PE is going to look for a Delaware corporation. So there's a very sexy thing called a Delaware flip, which is where you have an Irish company that has a US subsidiary owned in Delaware, and the investor comes in the US and says, I will invest, but I'm not investing in a company in Belfast. So what happens is you flip the subsidiary to be the holding company, and they invest in that. So Delaware ticks a box for investors looking to come in.
Okay. That's useful. Is that helpful, something? Good. We probably have time for maybe one question, but if anybody has to run, that's grand. We are hitting 5 o'clock, so I'm sure we could talk about this probably for hours.
Are we holding people up for going to the bar now? That's the most significant.
from your turkey dinner.
I only have to go baste the turkey, so that's okay.
Does anybody have a question for the panel? Yeah,
I
Rachel.
have just one.
Sure.
When expanding to the US or even just trying to get investment in the US, how important is the team at that stage? Because obviously, is it more worth to like build your team first, or you can go over there as like a solo founder? And because obviously you're trying to maintain your presence in the UK, but also trying to branch out to the US. So is it important to have a team backing you at first, or can you just go solo in a sense?
My view would be you, regardless of whether you have a team or not, you have to seem to be present in the US. So if that means if you can't do that personally because you're too busy keeping the UK entity in place, then I think you need to look at that team. If you're committed and you're going to get on a plane at customer beck and call every X weeks or whatever, then maybe that's fine. But I'll defer to the experts here who will have a bigger opinion. But certainly from practical experience, for us, it was boots on the ground. It was people that, you know, they could speak to us whenever they wanted, and we could get on a plane within a day and be sitting in front of them without jet lag. Made a difference for us in terms of selling to people.
So is this kind of in the context, Rachel, of, okay, I could sell for a while here and then move to the US, or I'm starting out and I actually want to start in the US? Is that kind of as well where you're getting to?
It's more like if you already started in the UK and
Okay.
want to expand to the US, but then
Team
also,
first,
yeah.
sure. Okay. And any thoughts on that, Paul or Julie?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding the question, is it you're based in the UK and you're looking for funding in the US?
Yeah,
And do you need? Yeah, you would need to have a US presence to raise funding. I believe. Funders.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there are a lot of companies. Like if you look at Techstars Canada right now, half their investments are going to African companies who are not in Canada. So you do have some VCs that are specializing in going abroad and finding. Listen, I think good technology, right? If it's great technology, VCs are going to take a look at it. And there's a lot of accelerator programs where they will bring you over. Techstars is one of those, right? Where they look all over the globe. And I've participated in their panels, and probably 60% of the people that were in Canada for those panels, and the US has that as well, whether that's Y Combinator and others. What people don't realize is Y Combinator goes to Canada first. They're usually sitting out at Waterloo and Kitchener because that's where a lot of tech talent is. And so a lot of VCs will look at your tech. They might invite you onto their soil because they have like a 10-week program with Techstars. They would bring you for 6 months to Canada and you would live there. And then they would bring all kinds of people in and you're presenting your technology. So there are definitely accelerator programs. I think a good idea for even these accelerators is look for lookalike accelerators that you can partner with. And then I would have a performance board for my participants. Have radical transparency about what are my performance goals for the year and share that the way that salespeople do, right? Because I'd like to know more about the people sitting in the room, and that's something you can kind of share. But yeah, I would just say there are a lot of programs where you don't have to physically reside. They are looking for good tech all over. The Israelis are a prime example of that. They get a lot of investments from US VCs and vice versa. So the programs do exist out there, but it is easier if you're on soil, but they definitely exist.
At the accelerator level, you're exactly correct. On the tech side, they will look anywhere. If you're not tech, we just had a deal go down where one buyer would not buy an Irish company. He wanted to buy the subsidiary because it was based in Europe and he didn't want anything to do with the EU. Then another person came in and did buy the Irish company. But if you're looking for the accelerator space, they will look.
Yeah, I see accelerator VC
where
investment.
you are, yeah.
Yeah, exit for sure, but I would say VC or accelerator investments in your company and participation, they exist.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
It kind of comes back just to finish off on that, because the guys it's very, very valid. It's also to look at that surgical nature of how you grow. So actually looking for the right opportunity. So various states and cities will run sandbox programs. So Arizona spent $27 million on a fintech sandbox, which was to try and identify the best new technology in the fintech space and get them into Scottsdale. you know, that's where they wanted them to be to try and grow that community from there. So there are different specialisms in each one, and it's just about being patient and surgical and going for the right thing. It's a huge opportunity. The final thing I would say on the original question about when to look at that US growth, it's whenever you feel you're ready to it. If I would always make the point that yes, the flight's slightly longer, granted, but if you were going to sell for Irish companies, I would say if you were going to go and try and sell in England for growth, why can you not go in the other direction for growth from a business development point of view? You know your market share, your available market grows significantly in GB. It explodes in the US. So just have that thought process about it's not as big, and that's one thing I wanted to say when I was here today, is it's not as big and as scary as you think. So, you know, you can make that jump in a sensible, safe way.
Great. That's a lovely note to finish on. Thank you, Declan. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you very much to each of our panels. So Jolie, thank you. Paul, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for taking time out of this special day.
Great to be here.
Insight with all of the founders, and guys, thank you very much.
Now football. We get to go do football.
They're going drinking. I'm based in Turkey, so life is good.
So on that note, we are heading over for 6 o'clock to the Perch. There are some drinks, Christmas drinks with AWS and Ormo Bath. So everybody is more than welcome to join us there. We can continue conversations, continue the crack, as we always do. And yeah, I will share contact details with each of the speakers if that's okay. If anybody would like to have any follow-up conversations, and we'll share back a recording and a summary of what we talked about today with you. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thanks very much. All the best. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.